This episode is presented by Dakota Resource Council. For nearly 50 years, DRC has worked across North Dakota to protect our land, water, and future.
Dakota Resource Council has definitely been shaping policy at the local, state, national levels. What role does DRC play in shaping that policy?
It's important for my people because we are grassroots people. We've always been grassroots people, Indigenous people, and having the tools and the resources that Dakota Resource Council can provide would up your game so much that, you can win and you can face these decision makers head on.
Become a member, volunteer and take action, or donate today at drcinfo.org.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inform.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inform.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inform.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk, where I think everybody on this podcast right now is enjoying the crossover break from the legislative session. I know I am. It gets overwhelming, especially that many bills getting jammed through at the end. Our previous guest, our previous show, we were talking about that, about maybe some ways to triage that. Because in all due respect, I mean, this is not me dunking on anybody at the legislature. When you have that many bills in, I don't know how you do some of them justice. I think there were some bills that got more attention than they needed, and other bills didn't get maybe as much as they needed. But here we are. We're on a break. The legislature is going to kick off again Wednesday next week, although I don't think there'll be any floor sessions. It sounds like committee work first day or two, and then they'll be back to floor sessions. But joining us during the interim, joining Chad and I, is State Senator Sean Cleary, who had a couple of interesting moments. And I was trying to decide which one I wanted to talk to you about first. One, both Chad and I, let's start with Senate Bill 2307. That's Senator Keith Bame's bill. He cast it as protecting children from pornography in libraries. I would argue that our libraries don't have pornography. Certainly our libraries probably have some books that all of us on this call would agree that children maybe shouldn't be reading. But I just don't perceive that librarians are trying to push those books on kids. I don't think our libraries have a problem. I don't think they're pornographers. I don't think they're groomers or anything else. And when that bill passed in the Senate, but Senator Cleary, you stood up and you made a pretty impassioned argument against it. And one of the things you said very specifically was that our librarians are not pornographers. They're not pedophiles. They're not groomers. Talk a little bit about that moment for us.
Thanks, Rob and Chad, for having me on. When we were debating that bill, I did get a little frustrated with the fact that there's this connotation that these folks who are doing a really hard job, whether they're teachers or they're librarians and they're providing a public service, that they're being sort of vilified in this way. And, on that bill, I made it pretty clear what my concerns were on when I spoke on the floor. When we bring in a state's attorney to a situation like that, we're basically bringing law enforcement into a conversation about books in the library. And I go to the library with my kids a couple of times a month. If there's an issue that needs to be resolved, I feel pretty confident in our ability as adults to figure that out without having to call the police on my librarian. So when we talk about things related to censorship or book banning, I don't think that's ultimately the goal here, but when you bring law enforcement into a dispute about kids' books, there is a pretty heavy-handed response to that, and I just couldn't support a bill like that.
So I want to double down on. I thought your speech was great. I sort of joked to people. It's hard to see Senator Cleary get worked up, and you were maybe at a 4 on a scale of 0 to 10, but that was pretty hot for you. I would also point out you didn't just say librarians; you also said teachers are not those things as well, which certainly I appreciated. So what I'm struggling with a little bit, Sean, and it's probably not your job to respond to this, but I do struggle with the legislature on one hand saying, me as a parent, I have the fundamental right to decide what's best for my children, but then they don't trust me to go to the Bismarck Public Library and determine what's best for my kid. You said you bring your kids to the Bismarck Library. I bring Evan to the Bismarck Library. It's a great place. What are these people, what are these folks seeing that I'm missing? Like, is it just a boogeyman? Is it just the internet? Is it just a message bill? Like, can you help? I mean, do you understand where they're coming from?
Chad, I have talked with a few of them, including Senator Boehm on that, and I give folks the benefit of the doubt. I think they're doing what they think is the right thing to do. But again, in my mind, there's just so many better ways to address these issues. I care a lot about the same topic they do. I don't want my kids exposed to inappropriate materials, but if we're going to give folks who we've seen it in other states who are trying to remove books from libraries that are not related to pornography or explicit material, and now we're saying, hey, if you don't like the answer to that, you can go get your state's attorney and a police officer and come into the library. It's just not the way adults solve issues on these topics. So I I've had good conversations with my colleagues who I disagree on this. I don't think we're going to come to a place of agreement, but I think we just need to be in a place where we're trusting parents.
I agree with that, and it is hard. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of this stuff is subjective. I mean, sometimes it's very obvious what's inappropriate. Sometimes it's less so, particularly when we're coming to themes about LGBTQ lifestyles, where there are people who find even the acknowledgement of that community to be inappropriate for children, and others who have a problem with it. Where I draw the line for my 10-year-old may not be where others, even on this call, draw
Well,
the
and I
line.
think that's right, Rob. I mean, I struggle more with my kid looking at books that involve gun violence or other kind of violence. That's where we draw the line, right? And obviously, we don't want Evan watching pornography or whatever, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen. But we do have sort of different lines in the sand. And again, if we're going to trust parents, let's trust parents.
Sean, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was a kind of a growing issue with gambling in our state, and calling it an issue. I, I, I don't want to make it sound like I'm just against gambling, because I'm not. But we've opened the door and we've seen a boom in charitable gaming driven by e-tabs, and that has had a lot of ramifications that are kind of interesting. We had a bill, and it was House Bill 1276, and it got killed in the House pretty decisively. So I don't think we're going to see that one back at all this session. But if it had passed, it would have required that local governments, because under the law, local governments are allowed to have, very sort of circumscribed permits for certain types of gaming, mostly raffles, but the law does allow for some things like blackjack, or I think like a pinwheel maybe as well. And the prizes are limited. I think they can't do more than 40,000 in prizes a year. So it is pretty limited. But Representative Jared Hendricks, a Republican from Fargo, his House Bill 1276 would have required that local governments deem political organizations, we're talking about candidate campaigns, we're talking about political parties, would have required that they deem those public spirited organizations and be allowed to game. That bill failed, but you wanted to go a step further. You sent me a copy of a House concurrent resolution, and at the time you sent it, it didn't even have a number. I don't know if it's been assigned one since. But what it essentially would do is it would say, I'm going to quote now directly from the resolution. It says, proceeds from a game of chance, lottery, or similar activity may not be used to support, finance, or influence any political campaign, candidate for office, ballot measure, or political organization. Why did you think it was important to put that in?
Well, Rob, when I saw the bill over on the House side, it made me realize that we have some pretty serious concerns when it comes to gaming in this state. I think even right now, there's a lot of issues that are outstanding that need to be addressed. But I think common sense would dictate we don't want charitable gaming supporting political activity. That's not what anybody had in mind. It's not what proponents of charitable gaming had in mind. It's not what opponents of charitable gaming had in mind. And if we want to pick on Chad for here for a little bit, we could. But I just
Please.
think, what would my colleagues think if North Dakota United's nonprofit arm, which I think you guys have one of those, set up charitable gaming and then use those proceeds to fund a political campaign? People would be losing their minds, or at least most of them would be. And so I just think common sense here dictates that we shouldn't be standing up charitable gaming operations to support political campaigns. It kind of goes hand in hand with my other bill, Senate Bill 2156, that brings more transparency to our campaign finance system. I've been involved, on my own and then on the federal level here with kind of two pretty intense political campaigns last cycles, and folks have a lot of concerns about the role of money in politics. And from my perspective, adding more transparency into that, and then when we encounter something like the boom in charitable gaming that we've had in our state, we need to be proactive about addressing those. So that's why I brought it's resolution 4027 related to prohibiting or banning the use of charitable gaming for political purposes, and then Senate Bill 2156, which improves transparency in our campaign finance system.
Senator, taking a step back and looking at gaming, I mean, there are just so many things going on right now. It's hard to even wrap your head around. We got sports gaming. We have the issue with the tribal casino up in Grand Forks. We have this explosion of charitable gaming in public spirited organizations. Do you feel like it's time that the state sort of wraps its arms around all this stuff going on? Because Rob and I have talked about, people don't think we have legal gaming. But I could go and play blackjack at a lot of places within a few blocks of my office right now.
When it's a multi-billion-dollar industry
Right.
in our state, we have gambling in North Dakota. It's legal.
Yeah, what do we need to do to wrap our arms around this?
Well, there was an interim study last interim, and to be honest, the outcome of it was hardly anything. We had a bill that basically said if you're a tourism organization, you can't do charitable gaming. I don't think that's really what anyone has envisioned the issue here being. It's not just blackjack. I like playing blackjack. I don't have anything against it. That's a fraction
Drop
of
in the
a
bucket.
fraction of a percent compared to e-pull tab machines. So the e-tab machines have changed the entire game. It went from, here's a few dollars to help support your charity through blackjack or pig wheel or something like that, to billions of dollars of gross proceeds, millions of dollars of net proceeds. And there was a lot of important information from that interim study. It's hard to track where the money's going. We don't really have much oversight unless you specifically ask for it on who's getting it. Since these are nonprofits, if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, you can go look at their 990s and see what kind of revenue they're getting, what kind of things they're spending their money on. But yeah, there's a lot of issues going on. And so with this resolution, with the political side of it, it's one small part of the conversation saying, hey, we have identified a lot of issues here with this that I think need more inspection. But in the meantime, let's just be explicitly clear. We're not going to do this and use it to funnel money to political campaigns.
Yeah, I think at the very least, that's such low-hanging fruit. Let's get that done. And by the way, that would be an amendment to the Constitution, so the voters would have to approve that. I don't think we'd have any problem getting the voters to approve that. That's a pretty simple, straightforward message. I've kind of felt like we need like a holistic master plan for what we want gambling to look like in North Dakota, and something that takes into account all of it. How do we want to deal with the tribes that, the boom in e-tabs has taken a bite out of their bottom line. We're seeing with our friends from Turtle Mountain, they want to come off the reservation and build a facility near Grand Forks. I'm not necessarily against that, but I think we need to think, we have other tribes in the state too. They may want to do the same thing. How are we going to deal with that as a state? How are we going to deal with charitable gaming? can we get more reports out of this? Can we get more oversight out of this? We have, I mean, even our current regulation seems stratified because we have the Gaming Commission and the Attorney General's office, but we also have a gambling, I'm forgetting even what they're called, the Gambling Council, like it's a board of a commission. Yeah. It's a board of, appointees that essentially, um, I don't know that if I read
Oh,
it,
they haven't met in a couple of years.
I was
Sorry,
gonna say,
it's
they haven't met
not,
in a couple of years. So what are they
no.
even doing? So
Yeah.
it feels like
Well-
we could get unified and have like, this is how we're
Well-
going to regulate it. This is what we're going to allow. This is what gambling looks like in North Dakota.
Well, Rob, a couple of things on that. When we debated that casino that was being proposed up in Grand Forks, there was just an incredible level of irony in some of the floor speeches about, hey, pretty soon we have a casino in every town. And it's like, I have some big news. We effectively do in any bar that has.
In some, they're calling themselves casinos. I mean, it's in the branding. I have a image. In fact, I'm looking. There's a place in West Fargo where I think it's an existing bar where they're doing a refurbishment and they have casino right on the outside of it. And maybe that's okay, but again, it kind of speaks to where we were at this without North Dakotans ever explicitly having an up or down moment where we said, yes, we're going to allow gambling in North Dakota.
And I hate to sound overly self-righteous about this, but gambling is an addiction. It's very clear that people can develop addictive behavior to gaming. And so I think we need to have an honest discussion about, are we using charitable gaming, something that's an addictive behavior, to funnel money? Again, some of the causes are great. Some of them I think could use a little bit more scrutiny. But this is something that folks are becoming addicted to. And I'm sorry, the state appropriating a few more dollars to addiction treatment, I support it. It's good. But it's like starting a fire and then putting the fire out and asking to be patted on the back about it. So we have a lot of discussions, I think, need to have discussions about the widespread availability of it. And to a point you made a little bit earlier too, more public reporting, at least a little bit more transparency into where this money's going, who's benefiting. And again, the political side of it is one small aspect, one that I think common sense would dictate is important to do, but we have a lot more work to do.
I've sort of evolved a little bit on gaming. I used to be, legalize everything, but I think to your point around addiction, I think e-pull tabs and also sports gaming on your phone has accelerated issues around addiction, and that we do need to wrap our arms around that a little bit. I'm going to switch gears a little bit towards the debate around mandatory minimum, truth in sentencing. Before I get into that, I do want to fact check myself from the previous podcast. Senator Cleary let me know that there was not a study on this. In fact, it came from an agency bill, not through the interim committee. And so literally we haven't done the study that Senator Dever was asking for. But Senator Cleary, that was an interesting debate. It's an interesting food fight is too simplistic and, to describe it between the governor's office, the attorney general. Your chamber passed the bill to go over to the House. You were opposed to it for a variety of reasons. Can you talk about your reason for the opposition and where do you see this going?
Well, I opposed the bill for a couple reasons, and I guess, I said those reasons on the floor. We knew a few things about truth in sentencing and mandatory minimums. It'll make sentences longer. That's the stated goal, and proponents of that would say too. And it's going to be more expensive. This bill basically severely limits how we can use transitional facilities, which are part of the rehabilitation section of Department of Corrections and Rehabilitations, and keeping people in high security facilities is going to cost more money. What I have concerns about is the things that we don't know. And the other states that have done this, we've seen their budgets balloon on the amount they spend on corrections, but we haven't seen their communities get any safer, and we haven't seen recidivism go down. And those are two things that I think really need to be a big part of this conversation. And I have nothing against, I think Drew Wrigley does an incredible job for us as Attorney General. It's not anything personal. It's not anything personal about the Department of Corrections and the work they're doing or law enforcement. But what I'd like to see on a bill like this is a little more consensus. The Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, those folks care about safety in our communities. Our judges care about safety in our communities. Law enforcement does. The Attorney General's office does. And what we're seeing with this bill is basically one side of that pushing this policy change that's going to have a big impact on our correction system, but in my opinion, not a clear impact on public safety or recidivism.
That's what I wanted to see. And what Chad was referencing is I think I had said, or Senator Dever had called for a study, and Chad said, well, it came out of interim committee. They already studied it, and obviously we've cleared that up. That wasn't the fact.
Did you just
And
want to double down on the fact I was wrong? I mean, I already admitted that, Rob. Come
I
on.
would say, sorry to interrupt, but there was study on reentry, and that produced, I think, 2 or 3 different bills in the House side that have to do with pretrial services. And there was, for the most part, consensus on those. This idea, though, about truth in sentencing and the mandatory minimum aspect, which is a smaller portion that folks don't seem to be talking about as much, but does still exist in this bill, that was not out of a study.
Yeah, well, my problem is we've seen a lot of assertions. I mean, the Attorney General's office has their story, which is where crime rates are climbing, skyrocketing, because we're letting people out of jail too quickly, and DOCR is sort of callously disregarding, the impact of letting dangerous people out. And they certainly have anecdotes about people who have gotten out and gone on to do terrible things, and that's all fair. I'm not. The problem is that DOCR tells a very different story. And I think in order to have a properly informed debate about this, we need some consensus on what the facts are. And I feel like there's an opportunity also to get the various aspects of our criminal justice system together. How does the judiciary feel? I mean, the judges are the ones who are issuing the sentences. How do they feel about this? How does the defense bar feel about it? We probably know how they feel about it, but they should be part of the conversation. Let's get both sides. I thought it was really interesting that Senator Magrum stood up and said that he had sort of polled some of the people in his district and got very mixed answers. He said, I think he said he had a sheriff who liked it and a state's attorney who didn't like it. We got to find some consensus on what the problem is so that we can have a good debate about what's the proper response, if any. And I feel like that's the missing piece in all of this.
Well, and it's not all just about money, but money does play a big part in it. I had to carry the Department of Corrections budget immediately before we voted on this bill, and it's hundreds of millions of more dollars just this biennium, and we haven't even made these changes. Our prisons are full. Our communities are getting safer right now. I do take an exception to this, calling what we currently do as the Norway model. Norway incarcerates 60 people out of every 100,000. North Dakota, we incarcerate around 600, and we're about average, maybe slightly below average in the country. So it's not like we're letting folks walk around wherever they want right now. We incarcerate a lot of people, and that's part of the criminal justice system. But we do need to think long term, holistically about what we're doing to make our communities safer in a way that's sustainable with taxpayer dollars. We can't appropriate hundreds of millions of dollars on top of our budget system every single year, especially for something that we're not seeing any improvement over the status quo in public safety.
And I struggle when we get a little obsessed sometimes, especially when we focus in a lot of policy areas. Sometimes we focus on the Scandinavian countries and say, well,
maybe there's a lot of Scandinavians here.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of and I understand that. And listen, we can learn from anywhere, but our Scandinavian friends are playing a different game. Their society is a lot more racially homogenous than we are. They have just fewer people in general than we do. It's a different place. They're playing a different game than we are. And again, maybe we can learn from them, but sometimes we get a little obsessed with that. And I just think, like, to your point, we don't have the Norway model in North Dakota.
Senator Cleary, you had a pretty big change this session going from policy committees, I think it was Human Services and state government or local government, to appropriations. I got to be honest, I always watch appropriations and think, man, this is boring. How are you enjoying that change from policy committees into where, the rubber hits the road and how we fund things? Are you enjoying it?
I've been enjoying it. The grass is always greener. I do miss some of the discussions we had on the policy committee side, but We have a lot of important work to do on the budget, and I think it's only going to become harder in the second half. We're not as underwater, I guess, as we were last legislative session, where we've appropriated about $377 million more dollars than we are bringing in revenue. But we're going to have to make a lot harder decisions here in the second half about what are our wants versus what are our needs, and what are our priorities. And I think those are important conversations to have, whether it's agency budgets or these other bills that come through. So I've been enjoying it. I got a good group of mentors, I think, on the committee. On my subcommittee, we have a pretty diverse group politically, and we're halfway through, and I think we still like each other for the most part, even as we disagree. So I've been enjoying it. It is a big change up, but it's something I think it's a good place to make a big impact on too.
I'm surprised Chad had to ask that question. I look at you and think that is exactly the sort of dweeb who's going to enjoy appropriations. Sean Clear,
Yeah.
and appropriate like
Listen,
fish in a water.
I would never call my senator a dweeb, just so you know that, Sean. I would never do that. I do miss having you on some of the committees that I pay attention to. And you're just stuck in that hole, all the appropriators making the big choices.
Yeah. But no, I think gonna have to sharpen the pencils a little bit in the second half and take a look at these budgets. And again, it's about what are wants versus what are needs. And we have big ticket items in the second half that we need to figure out how the math works on property tax, on education funding. This public safety conversation is going to have to be a big part of that too.
Sean, thanks for your time.
Hey,
Thanks,
for
Sandra.
having me, guys. Yep.
This episode is presented by Dakota Resource Council. For nearly 50 years, DRC has worked across North Dakota to protect our land, water, and future.
Dakota Resource Council has definitely been shaping policy at the local, state, national levels. What role does DRC play in shaping that policy?
The industry is talking to people one at a time, and what DRC does is organize local groups and listen to people, and our voices are heard.
Become a member, volunteer, and take action, or donate today at drcinfo.org.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Senator Sean Cleary and some weighty stuff there. The two takeaways, Chad. I think on criminal justice stuff, we've got to establish what the facts are, because when we're getting just wildly conflicting, I think the legislature should not pass that bill this time. I think we need to form and not have it just be the Attorney General's office or just the DOCR or even just the two of them. We need to get the judges in. We need to get the defense attorneys in. We need to get the prosecutors in. We need to get corrections in and the sheriffs, because they're running the local jails. And just let's establish what all the facts are, and then we can have a debate about what we're going to do about it.
It's hard to legislate when you don't have a shared set of facts, right? I mean, I think that everybody in the legislature wants to keep our community safe. They don't want to spend billions of unnecessary dollars to lock people up who shouldn't be there. But I think we need to have a shared set of facts to figure out the best way to keep our community safe in a fiscally responsible way.
Yeah, I agree. And this, I think we got to do holistically. We've got to do something about gaming too, where we have a holistic. This is what we want, whether it's tribal gaming, whether it's charitable gaming, whether it's sports betting, whatever. This is what the state of North Dakota wants in terms of gambling.
Rob, I couldn't help but think of Sean's grandmother, former Representative Audrey Cleary, who was very much opposed to gambling when she was in the legislature. And I remember thinking she was sort of, oh, look at this fuddy-duddy who doesn't get it. And a lot of the stuff that she was concerned about has sort of happened in terms of an explosion and addiction and all those kind of things. So, but we have to wrap our arms around this and figure out what North Dakota wants in terms of gaming.
I hope it all works out and it's fine, but I don't know. I mean, there's a reason why when you get off the plane in Las Vegas, there's a slot machine staring you in the face. Right. And I've even seen videos now where you can just put your credit card right into the slot machine and just play money right off your debit card or your credit card. I look at some of that and I just think that's dangerous. That cannot be good.
Yeah. And I keep thinking about, like, with sports gaming, I love the idea of sports gaming until I hear about the prop bets of people sitting in the stands at games and betting on what the next batter is going to do, or if their score runs the next inning or whatever. And it's just like a constant gambling thing. Having it at your fingertips is different than I think what we envisioned when charitable gaming went into effect years ago.
I agree. All right. We're not going to talk about gambling with our next guest, Scott Louser, unless he wants to. Representative Louser, how are you?
I'm all right. I'll talk about that if you want to. I'm assuming what you're talking about was Senate bills that, that haven't even come over to the House yet, except for the sports betting constitutional amendment proposal that I had.
Yeah. Well, we were mostly talking about it. General Senator Cleary had a constitutional amendment to make sure that proceeds for revenues can't go to political sources or organizations, which I think is low-hanging fruit. I mean, everybody ought to agree on that. But beyond that, it's a tough issue. We had you on it. By the way, your tone sounds like someone who is very much in the crossover after a pretty weary, draining last couple of days of the first half.
Well, yeah, I don't mean to come across that way. I mean, we did pretty much the last 2.5 weeks were 13 hours a day. And yeah, I mean, crossover, usually you get back and I get to spend a couple days in my company with the people that work for me and get caught up with things and the little things at home, getting the interior of my car washed or cleaned. This is the stuff that you don't get to do. And yeah, it's just been consumed with other things here the last few days. So wasn't my intent.
I want to get your take on property taxes because your bills has become central, one of 3 that the House sent to the Senate. And I want to ask about what the strategy was behind that, because I'm not sure I understand it. But before we get there, let's talk about House Concurrent Resolution 3013. It was a vote taken right towards the end before crossover. It urges the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn its precedent, striking down state-based bans on same-sex marriage. You voted for it. Then you were one of 5 lawmakers who since have said, Representative Jim Jonas said that he just voted the wrong way, didn't intend to vote that way. But then others, Representative Brandy Pyle, Representative Matt Ruby, Representative Don Longmire, all saying we regret our votes. Talk a little bit about that, because when I talked to you on the phone, you said that you saw Representative Austin Foss's impassioned speech on the floor. You talked about being moved by it. You said you went up and spoke to Representative Foss after that speech or after the vote. Can you describe that conversation to us, or walk us through, I guess, how you came to change your mind?
Well, yeah, I can describe the conversation. It was really simple. I had not met Representative Foss. We don't serve on any of the committees together. And maybe it's something I should do every session. I should go around and introduce myself to somebody that's newly elected. I hadn't done that. He was emotional. He was spent. Probably a good time to go over and tell him. I didn't know his story. I didn't know he was married. I didn't know anything until he disclosed that publicly. And I told him I respected what he did. It took guts. And he just earned a lot of respect from me. I don't know if it mattered to him, but that was my introduction to him. And I thought he did a fantastic job on the floor. And when his remarks were concluded, that was it. There wasn't any debate. There wasn't questions. We moved to a vote, and the board opened and we voted. And then I posted the video that you're referring to a couple days ago, which was, was building up to that. It was 2 days after the vote, and I have regrets the way I voted. And sometimes you learn after the vote, you learn more information. But I don't go out and tell the public I wish I would have voted differently just based on something I learned after the vote. That one bothered me, and I wish I could have it back.
Representative Louser, I appreciate the fact you and your colleagues are now coming out and saying you wish you'd have it, you would have voted a different way. But I'm struggling a little bit with this. Same-sex marriage has been legal for 10 years in this country. You knew for months, a month leading up to this vote, that this resolution was coming forward. You sat in the chamber and you listened to Representative Foss's speech, and you voted against it. And then somehow, within 48 hours, you saw the light on this issue. How had you not seen the light in the previous 10 years? How had you not seen the light in the previous few months when this was introduced? How did you not see the light during Representative Foss's speech? Some cynical people are out there saying, as you and some of your colleagues have been taking some heat for this vote, and that's why you saw the light.
Yeah.
What would you say to, I mean, literally, Scott, 10 years this has been legal.
Right. Yeah, it's a valid question, and I'm telling you at the time, I looked at that resolution initially thinking, how is this even effective? How can the US Supreme Court change their mind without a case before them or a constitutional amendment? And I voted the way that I did, with some regret. And Chad, I don't have a good answer to say, well, you knew about this. I know about the decision 10 years ago. To me, that was settled. Whether I agree with it or not, that is the case. And as I mentioned, I didn't know Representative Foss's married status. I never asked. It doesn't matter to me. It was an impassioned speech. I wish there was more debate on the floor. I thought there was going to be. With an 11-1 vote coming out of the committee, there had to be something in the committee that moved everybody to one vote. I don't have a fantastic answer that's going to satisfy everybody. The best that I could do was tell the world I regretted what I did.
But just point, and I'm gonna, again, I'm struggling a little bit with that. I mean, Representative Murphy posted on Twitter that said, if these people regret their votes, why didn't they join us, the 40 of us who voted right in the first place, on this thing? I don't think a legislator should have to hear from one of their colleagues that they have a same-sex marriage in order to understand this issue. You have a lot of constituents who are gay that should have made you understand this issue. You're a conservative. Like, this resolution was dumb. The fact that any resolution would send something to the Supreme Court, all this did was send a message to a lot of North Dakotans that you're not welcome here. 2 days later, I'm glad you switched your vote, but I don't understand. And again, you said I won't understand it. And again, I'm happy you got to this point. I just don't know you have this 10-year leeway to understand same-sex marriage, and now you're saying you didn't know Austin's story. And if you would have known Austin's story, maybe you would have voted differently. This isn't just about Austin Foss. This is about
Chad,
your friends
I'm not
and
saying that.
gay.
No, I'm not saying that. Rob mentioned about his speech, and I went up and talked to him afterwards. It isn't a single floor speech that's going to move my vote. It was after the vote. It was that was staying with me. Not 2 days later. 2 days later is when I did the video when we got back. But you're right, and I'm taking the heat for it. I didn't know other colleagues were going to come out and say that they changed. I had heard that Representative Jonas. Well, I knew because he said he voted wrong on the floor. He asked that to be printed in the journal. I didn't know any of the others were going to say anything. I heard about that after I did the video. I saw Representative Pyle's post and I liked it. And then Rob had called and said, hey, I saw that you did this. I didn't know the others were going to do that. So I did that on my own. There are a couple votes that I wish I could have back, but I don't go tell the public, I wish I would have voted different on a bill every time. This one warranted that. I made a mistake and I've apologized for it, but there's probably that's not going to satisfy everybody. I understand that.
Appreciate. And again, I appreciate the fact that you are coming out and saying this now. It's better than the alternative.
Well, and I do want to point out, when you mentioned conservative, I voted against the 10 commandments in the classroom. I voted against making the mother of a unborn baby a murderer. I voted against chaplains in the classroom. I voted against the resolution that said Jesus is king. And all of those came from the right.
Understood.
So I'm not justifying it, but there are votes that that nobody has come out and said, hey, that was abnormal for you to vote the way that you did on those. So, I accept it. That comes with the territory. I don't have a better explanation than say I was wrong.
I have more to say about sort of the reaction to people changing their minds, because I think some of the reactions, people changing their minds in politics happens this abruptly, happens rarely. And I don't think that I think some of the reaction to it has been unhealthy. But let's talk about that maybe when Chad and I are on our own. Scott, I want to talk to you about the property tax bills. Why did the House
Another easy thing.
totally easy? Why did the House send the Senate 3 times? I mean, I'm sure you're glad your bill was one of them, but why not? Why did the House not send a unified property tax message to the Senate?
Well, that came up in the Appropriations Committee, which I sit on, as we were voting on all three of those bills in our last meeting before we sent out the final package. And Chairman Vigasaw said that he had talked to leadership, which is, when we say leadership, I include Majority Leader Mike LaFleur, Assistant Majority Leader Glenn Bosch, and the Speaker of the House, Robin Weiss. And of course, Majority Leader LaFleur is on 1176, one of them that we passed. Speaker of the House Weiss has his own property tax bill, which you're referring to, and then mine. And the understanding was, let's send all three out to the floor of the House and let the whole House decide, as opposed to one committee. And I think the message coming out of that was, we're probably going to send all three, because I said I'll vote for all three. I want the Senate to be able to hear and vet. And what I think is going to happen is we're going to settle on one property tax reform and relief bill. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really matter what number it falls on, but we're going to take pieces of all of those and put them into one package. Now, I wouldn't be advocating for mine if I thought other ones were better. And I'm not done with mine yet.
Are you thinking? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think that even the Sunday before, so last Sunday I met with the counties, the cities, the township boards, school board association, MDCL, Farmers Union, Farm Bureau. Though they're the ones that are impacted by this, they have to implement it, and they're not being talked to. They're not literally sitting at a table. And so we did that on Sunday, and I said, guys, what do you want this to look like? Let's start with the premise that the legislature is going to pass a form of caps. What does that look like to you? And there were some pretty good ideas that came out of that. I'm probably going to have amendments drafted next week and presented to the House Finance or Senate Finance and Tax Committee to amend my own bill. And it'll be in the 9th version. So we're a long ways to go here. And I see 2 amendments even to my own bill. I don't know where that's going to land in the Senate, but I think the strategy was give the Senate the best ideas that we've had and see what they think. And I didn't think the vote was going to go the way it did in the House. 1168 only got 3 no votes. I thought it was going to be more contentious. But all of them got, I don't think any of them got any more than 10 no votes. So
are you giving a lot of authority here to the Senate, right? By throwing those 3 bills over there. One, does that make you a little nervous? And then I want you to talk a little bit more about caps. I mean, we had Senator Hogan last week, and he sounds like he wants some really, really solid caps with not a lot of wiggle room. So how do you feel about empowering the Senate, and what do you think these caps end up looking like when we're all said and done here?
Well, so empowering the Senate, they do, because it's the second half, they have a little bit more authority because now they own the bills, but they don't necessarily get the final say. It's going to conference committee eventually. There's going to be 3 House members and 3 Senate members finalizing what we come to. As far as the rigidity of the caps, I'll give you one of the ideas that came out of the meeting that I had that I think is going to be brought up in amendment is, let's say the cap is not 3% for political subs. Let's say it's either the lesser or the greater of 6% or the consumer price index plus a point. And let's say that number lands on 6. And we do the buyouts of the mills that I'm talking about, or we do credits for your primary residence. There's some sort of relief package, and then the reform package is the caps. If approximately half of your property tax is K-12 mills, and you cap the other half, we have to exclude schools from the cap, and I'll explain in a minute. But the other half is all a 3 or 5 or 6% cap. Let's land on 6. If that's half your property tax bill, that's a 3% increase in your property taxes after getting relief, maximum. So it isn't 6% increase, it's 6% of half of your tax capped out. And of course, there are provisions in these bills that say you can take it to a vote of the people in your district and or the political sub and have them give additional levy authority. In mine, it's a supermajority vote. It has to be at the general or the primary election. But touching on schools, my bill and the others leave the 60 mil mandate. Mine buys it down. I wanted to buy it out, and I'd still fight for that. But it leaves the mandate on the property taxpayer or on the school districts to levy the mills. So if you put a cap on the school districts and you mandate the mills and your valuation increases what the cap is, you're short money. And the state's going to step in and do what's called transition minimums. And we just got out of that for 7 years. Now you take a rapidly growing, not a school district, but a real estate market like West Fargo that might go up 15% in a year. If you mandate the mills and the values went up and you cap the tax, you're short on the mills. So the state is going to have to step in and pay the difference anyway. So I'm adamant that we cannot put the cap, the natural cap is on school districts in the number of mills. So that's already there. And that's one provision that if my bill doesn't survive, it has to go into the final package.
I have said repeatedly that the cap is the key to all of this. That the cap's not strong enough to stop property taxes from outpacing however we deliver the relief. All of this is a moot point, and the voters are going to remain as angry now as they have been. And one of the things I'm worried about, and I don't want to be critical of you talking to those groups, but I would argue that one of the reasons they've not maybe been looped in as much as they have is they are the architects of the problem. I am upset with them for bringing us to this position. And I'm very worried that the only thing that they want is wiggle room to get out from the cap so that we continue something that's akin to the status quo. And I'm worried that that's what they're going to get, is they're going to work around the edges and water down the cap to the point where it's ineffectual.
Well, if we make the caps ineffectual, then we've just spent a whole bunch of money and time. When I say a whole bunch of money, I'm talking 1 mil on K-12. 1 mil in K-12 is $12 million.
Yeah.
So 10 mils is 120. If we did all 60, we're talking $720 million that will eventually be rolled into the per pupil payment. And then we don't have any reform or control on the other side.
That's exactly my.
But I understand your concern, Rob, but we have to include the people and at least hear what they're saying. We might not even agree with them, but I'll tell you, the group that I met with, they're all like, yeah, it looks like we're going to get caps, where 6 months ago it was, we are opposed to caps. So we're getting there.
I'm glad that they've joined us in reality. I guess I'm glad.
Rob, I think you're being a little unfair to these groups. I also think we have to be careful that we're not painting too broadly, because as we know, all political subs are different. I mean, some have kept taxes low and others haven't. I think we can agree that, the majority have not kept them low enough, or else we wouldn't be in this position right here. But I do appreciate the fact that those groups are now understanding caps. I mean, I had conversations with these groups during the Measure 4 campaign, and it was, caps were not something that they were all that interested in. They get it. And I think a lot of them got it earlier than 6 months ago. They knew this was going to be part of the conversation. But I think, Rob, we have to include these people in the conversations about mechanically it works of the caps. And again, I don't know if it's 6. I sort of the 6% because it's actually 3% because you have half as much money sort of makes sense to me. But I think a 3% with some sort of off ramp. Again, Rob, I'm with you. Not a 10-year off ramp, but something smaller. I think there's something that can be worked. But I think you do have to include those people if they're the ones
I'm not saying-
implementing
right.
the cap.
Mechanically, they absolutely have to implement it. And I'm not saying don't talk to them, but they have spent 20 years making this the legislature's problem when they were the source of the problem. And so I have a limited amount of patience for any wiggle room. Like I want to hear like, well, this is going to create like what Representative Louser is talking about. Well, this is going to create, if this happens and this happens, it could create a shortfall. And then the state, sure, let's protect against that. That's a valid point to bring up. But I don't want to hear we don't want to be capped. I don't want to hear we want all sorts of off ramps and we want to be able to set the cap aside for 10 years because we held an election on the 4th of July or something and 100 people showed up and said we could set aside the cap for 10 years. No, absolutely.
Not to be dramatic or anything, right? About how they did.
Well, so Rob, I appreciate you brought that up because my bills allows them carry forward for 1 year, unused space, allows them with a vote of the people, a super majority, so 60%, additional levy authority for 5 years, and it has to happen either in June or it can't be at a special election. They can't pick when they want it heard. So there are some controls, and they know that. But they need to be heard because they're implementing it, and they're not even being talked to right now. So.
I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. In your bill, if you it's 60%, it's a 60% threshold. Is the other bill 50% or is it 60%? I know it's gone through a lot of changes, so sorry. That's why I'm asking.
I don't want to be wrong about that. I think 1176 is a super majority as well. I'm pretty sure, and they do have general or primary election. They removed the option for special election. In fact, we passed a bill that removed the option for school districts to hold special elections on bond issues. And that one only had like 5 no votes.
Yep.
How does Representative...
By the way, I was one of the no votes, but I was in the minority.
Last question. It seems like there were 3 bills passed. There's Representative Nathy's bill, which the governor's backing, your bill, and then Representative Weiss's bill. How does Representative Weiss's bill fit into this? Because it seems like a very different animal compared to your bill and Nathy's bill.
Yeah. I should clarify. We'll call Nathy's bill the primary residence tax credit bill. Mine is 10 mils for all property. Okay. And Weiss's bill is changing the ratio. When you take your fair market value and you multiply it, you cut it in half and then you multiply it times a factor. It's 10% for commercial and 9% for residential. Weiss cuts those ratios down. And so your property tax bill naturally goes down and the state pays the difference. So, and then his also caps, his has a 3% cap, but it drills down to the property as well and says your property tax can't go up by more than 3%. Mine says the budget of that political sub that is derived from property tax can't go up by more than currently 3%. It has the same effect, but Representative Weiss's drills down to the property. And I think it has the same effect because in mine, if my property taxes go up in a given political sub by 10%, they're going to have to offset that increase somewhere else on somebody else's and drop their taxes. So I don't see that happening. And I want to throw in one more thing. I think you guys talked to Representative Bale yesterday on annual sessions. I've always opposed that, and I spoke in favor of it. I testified in favor of it. As we implement tax reform, I think we are moving quickly to annual sessions, and I don't want to see increased days. I just want to see us meeting every year. And we can address these things as they come up because we're not going to get the cap right the first time. I don't think. I'd love to say we are.
I think that's fair, and I would argue not just property taxes. We also have implemented some pretty significant pension reform that I think is going to need regular attention from the legislature. There's a lot of policy areas where if the legislature met more often, I feel like the legislature could fulfill its oversight role a lot more effectively.
So I have one more question on property taxes. Like during this conversation, it feels like we haven't really narrowed the ideas down all that significantly in the first half of the session. Do you feel like have we made progress in the first half of the session in figuring out where we're going? Because it does seem like there's still a lot of stuff floating out there.
Yeah, I do feel like we've made progress because you look at what House Finance and Tax had before them. We had multiple targeted tax credits. We had some limited reform. We had limitations on assessment increases. We had some mill levy caps. We had all of that stuff kind of on the periphery. These are the three that came out of probably 50 different bills. So while it looks like we didn't make a lot of progress, if we've got three to work on, the three is the result of maybe 30, 40 bills that didn't pass. So I think we made progress. We've got awareness of what caps will do. We've got an understanding of the mills that are mandated versus not mandated. We have a recognition this is our top issue. We can't just do reform without relief. And quite honestly, Chad, that's a great question because last session the Senate had all the property tax. We had income tax on our side. So yeah, I'd say we've made progress. It's messy right now, but it's not as messy as I thought it was going to be 2 weeks ago.
Scott, I appreciate you coming on. Thanks for the time.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished interviews with Representative Scott Louser and, of course, Senator Sean Cleary. And really interesting debates. I mean, the property tax debate, I do agree with Representative Louser. I think they've made a lot of progress. I wish they narrowed it down a little more.
Me too.
And I am very, very worried. That is my one point of concern. I prefer Nathan's bill, which as it represents Governor Armstrong's bill. That's my preferred outcome. I could live with Louser's approach to the relief. I think I could even live with the Weiss approach to the relief. I think I would probably go Nathan bill, Louser bill, Weiss bill on that. I am terrified that they are going to cave and water down the cap. And then it'll all be for naught.
I also worry about a Frankenstein bill where they're taking a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you maybe don't see the significant results that people want, right? And so, they did make progress. There's no doubt. I forgot about all the different bills that are sort of, cutting around the edges. These were the three big ones. We knew these were the three big ones 2 months ago. I would have hoped we would have maybe made some consolidation. I always think it's interesting, and I think you wrote about it in your column about punting, when you give the other chamber, and at some point here, the two chambers aren't going to trust each other at all. Maybe we're still in a honeymoon of the 2025 session, but a lot of power going over to Mark Weber and Dean Rummel and the folks in the Senate Finance and Tax Committee.
And who knows what they're going to put in these bills. I mean, they're going to have to amend them, and I kind of wish we would just pass the Armstrong bill. I wish to narrow the cap exemption out to maybe 1 year at a time, and then just pass it. And
yeah, I do think Representative Louser brings up a good point on the mandated mills from the state in the funding formula for school boards, and so figuring out how that works, because they are a little bit different because of the mandated mills. But yeah, I mean, I'm still confident they're going to get something big. I think listening to Hogue when he was on with us at Peacock Alley, He wants something really rigid. So, your fear of that they'll water it down, I don't think that's getting through the Senate Majority Leader. And I don't think it's getting through the governor either.
Yeah, well, I hope you're right. And you probably are. The other thing I want to talk, we have asked Representative Louser. I thought it was really important that he walk us through his change of mind, and he acknowledged both during the interview and then when we spoke for a couple of minutes afterwards that his answer is just not going to be satisfying. And certainly this is one of those issues where you just see it one way or the other. Like you're either you're fine with same-sex marriage or you're not. There's not a lot of gray area there. And I understand his change of position is not going to be satisfying for a lot of people. The thing I'm struggling with, and I'm also was almost kind of struggling with your questioning of him.
I could tell, Rob. I could tell.
Not that I thought it was unfair or
Right.
anything like that. I don't know who does he have to satisfy? Well, what has to be satisfied there? Because I think Representative Louser has moved closer to me on this issue, right? My response to that is thank you. I'm glad we agree more than we did in the past. I don't really care about his previous position. Now, if he's flip-flopping back and forth all the time, then sure. But I don't have any reason to believe that these changes of minds are anything but heartfelt. And if that's true, why do I care about the rest of it?
So I think that's fair. I think what I struggle with a little bit is I don't think before the vote, Representative Louser was opposed to same-sex marriage. I don't think before the vote, Brandy Pyle was opposed to same-sex marriage. You said it when we were on the last podcast that some of these votes might have been political in nature. And so what I struggle with, I think most of these people, I think Matt Ruby's probably the same way, are being honest right now. They were dishonest or not being honest with their votes early on. And you said that, this is really, you're either for it or against it. I can make the case that everybody should have voted against this thing because it's stupid to pass a resolution that tells the Supreme Court to do something.
Even if you want same-sex marriage to be illegal, this does nothing.
Does nothing. And so I think there was a lot of wiggle room for people to just vote red and make this go behind. What I do hope coming forward, and again, I agree with what you're saying. These guys are in the right place now. I appreciate that. I struggle with there's 10 years of debate about same-sex marriage, and then even the insinuation that, and I know this isn't what he's trying to say, but I didn't know Representative Foss was gay and married, and so therefore that shouldn't matter, right? That shouldn't.
But I think Mr. Right. He heard a personal testimony that moved him, and so sure, maybe he's been right, and I don't know with Representative Louser. I don't perceive him as being somebody who is really, but maybe he does believe in his heart that even now that marriage should be one man and one woman. And maybe we should ask him specifically, even if he opposes this dumb resolution.
But that doesn't matter. It's not his decision, right? And that's what's stupid about this resolution.
Right. But I think if we don't ever just give people grace when they change their mind, nobody's ever going to change their mind. What's the incentive for somebody to change their mind if they're just going to get the snot beat out of them, even by people of goodwill who are happy they changed their mind? I think it's the worst kind of political punditry. And I've even seen columnists that work for my company, people on Facebook, all over the place where it's, yeah, but you didn't always agree with me, so I still hate you. Like, that is so, and I'm not accusing you of that.
Yeah, no, but I understand. But I also think it's when something happens this abruptly, because you did mention that, this was an abrupt change. This was a 48-hour change on a vote.
That's rare. That doesn't happen.
That's very rare. And I think it does deserve some level of conversation and scrutiny about what led to that change, right? And again, it's not like this is a concept we're not aware of. And so even sitting down, I think people have an opinion on these things. And that's what I struggle with. If you believe same-sex marriage is a bad thing, what would have changed in 48 hours, right? When you've had that 10-year runway to sort of formulate your opinion. And that's what I'm struggling with. I like the fact that people have evolved in this direction, but like there's a 48-hour period. What happened during that 48 hours? That's what I'm struggling with.
And I guess I don't know that I care that much how they came. We all have a lot of different paths to how we come to believe what we believe, or even how our attitudes about things change over time. I will tell you, for a long time, I was also against same-sex marriage, mostly when I was in my early 20s and I was getting involved politically for the first time. And I just kind of embraced that position because it was the Republican position at the time. And I felt, well, I'm a conservative Republican. This must be how I feel about it. Now, I came, and part of it was I have relatives who are in the LGBTQ community. I have an aunt who has been married, or not, I guess they're not married, but has been with the same woman. She has the most stable, most loving relationship out of anybody I know.
Right.
You know, so it was observing things like that. I changed my mind. Now, does it matter that in the past I had or how I came to it, or even how suddenly it happened? Because it was, in my recollection. Now, I'm not a legislator who's like taking a vote or anything, but I woke up one morning and just said, "This is stupid. Why am I spending my time advocating for this?" I went through that change, and I don't. And even Representative Louser talked about how, you know, it's obviously it's maybe not quite as weighty an issue, but he talked about him changing his mind about annual sessions. He used to be against, now he's for 'em. Do we care?
Yeah. So, but here's what I would say, that the difference between those two. A lot of people got hurt by that vote for 48 hours. A lot of people were very, very hurt by that. And it's great, again, that they're in the right spot, but you don't, like, you do damage and then you're just supposed, oh, okay, you've switched your mind now. And again,
But a lot of people are passionate about a lot of policy, and it hurts a lot of people when things don't go that way. And this is a tough one, and I'm not trying to diminish it from anything, but sometimes we get into this hierarchical thing where my hurt is more valuable than your hurt and everything else. And I don't know what there is to gain in hashing through all of that. If somebody moves in your direction, just be happy about it.
yeah. So just agree to disagree. I think that people deserve to have a better understanding of why somebody would remove in such a quick. And I do, you're mentioning the hierarchy of the anger. There was a state representative that stood in there and had 52 of his colleagues say that your relationship's not legitimate. There's thousands of North Dakotans who had 52 representatives that said your relationship is not legitimate. We can't just say that's just another issue we disagree on. I mean, that's a different thing. If somebody said, Evan's not my son because he's adopted or something like that, or my family's not, or do you remember the IVF fight that we had when Margaret City at one point said a child born through IVF is not born through love? Those kind of things hurt in a different way than just a policy disagreement.
That's fair. I just don't know what there is to gain from like holding on to the grievance as somebody who disagreed with you in the past.
Right.
Because at some point, I think it's just for a lot of people, and again, not you, but some of the people I see on social media, it's like, I hate this person and now they agree with me, and so I need an excuse to go on hating them.
So, and I think there's some process going on, like people do. I agree with that, right? We need to get over it. I do think that people deserve some time to figure that out. I also would say Representative Ista posted on social media and basically welcomed these votes to the right side of it.
He texted me too.
And he got the crap beat out of him by people on the left, by some people saying.
I thought that was very unfortunate.
No, and I agree it's unfortunate. I also appreciate Representative Louser being willing to come in here and talk about this, because he said this during the break. He's taking heat from other people for coming out and doing this, right? This is not a slam dunk either way.
And I want to make clear, I invited him on the show because I do think there is value in him explaining how that worked for him and giving some input and helping people understand. But I mean, some of the stuff, and again, we shouldn't be judging society by what we see on Facebook, which is a cesspool.
Yeah.
I just, why not just give people grace?
What I would like to happen now, Rob, is they should schedule the hearing on this on the Senate side ASAP and kill this thing. Just kill this thing and be done with it. These House members should go over and talk to their colleagues, say, let's take care of this. Let's send a message to all of our citizens that this was a mistake and we're going to defeat this thing.
Representative Ruby said he is going to be at the Senate hearing. Obviously, it's not up to him when it gets scheduled, but he says he will be there and testifying against it. Good for him. I'm glad.
Right, and I also recognize Louser and Ruby of the folks we've talked about, probably Longmire as well. I mean, Longmire is also interesting because he's a different generation,
Right.
in the northwest part of the state. I mean, them coming out after the fact and saying I made a mistake probably isn't politically helpful for them. It probably would have been easier for them just to let it die. So there is some courageousness about them saying it that they got it wrong, but
That's one thing one thing also that frustrated me about some of the reaction is they were like, oh, they're just doing this for political gain, or they got pressured from people. First of all, that's how democracy is supposed to work.
Right.
It is if people get together and then hopefully their elected representatives hear them. So yes, if they cowed to public opinion, that's democracy. But second of all, where's the political advantage for Representative Ruby, Representative Louser, even, Representative Pyle, who's
Kyle, I think, is a little different. I think, when you're in the eastern part of the state and she's got some West Fargo now, that might be a little bit
different. But
yeah.
there's not a lot of political. They could have stayed quiet and ridden it out, and that was probably the less risky move for all of them.
Here's the deal. Nobody's talking about the fact that Mike LaFleur voted for this thing, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people talking about the 4 or 5 who switched their votes, but there's still 48 left who voted for it who haven't said anything. And so that might be the more politically smart thing to do. Vote and keep your head down, and people are going to forget about it.
By the way, if all 5 of these lawmakers had voted the way what their position is now, that resolution doesn't pass. It needed 48 votes. It got 52.
The other thing, and I think Louser sort of referenced this, in the Senate, resolutions are voted on voice votes. So if this moves forward, most of the time, unless they ask for it.
I got to admit, sometimes I'm not paying a lot of attention to these resolutions because I don't care.
I think the way it works in the Senate, if it's a constitutional resolution, there's a recorded roll call. But these kind of things, it's a voice vote unless somebody asks for it to be differently. And I would hope that, again, get the hearing scheduled, move this along, vote this down, send a message that all North Dakotans and all people are welcome in North Dakota.
I just want to say it's great to be interested in why somebody changed their mind. And given the circumstances, sometimes it's even okay to be critical. But honestly, in this world where we're just tearing each other apart all the time, if somebody moves closer to you, just say thank you.
Yeah, well, yeah. And if you want to tear people apart, again, the people who voted yes, who haven't changed their mind, maybe tear them apart.
Let's maybe not beat up the people who move closer to us. Save your scorn for who are sticking to guns.
It is. I have to think about that with progressives. I mean, progressives spend a lot of time in circular firing squads. If somebody's not perfect on
conservatives,
conservatives as well. But again, I think pushing these guys on why they changed their position when they is fair. But I'm also let's go after the people who stayed wrong.
All right, we're gonna wrap this show up. We got some more listener texts from Representative Worry. Texted back. No, he had sent in a text previously where he was like, he was happy about how accurate we were, and Chad and I were ribbing him a little bit, saying, kind of a backhanded thing. Obviously, we knew that's not what he meant, but he texted in and said, Rob and Chad, I laughed at your comment on my comment. It did sound a bit like a backhanded compliment, but I didn't mean it to sound that way. Thanks for the shout out and keep up the good reporting work. I talked to them on the phone too. That was really great. We have another one from Nolan in Wing, North Dakota, who writes, talking a little bit about the intelligent design bill, which is one of the culture. By the way, the culture war bills got slaughtered. A lot of them did. I mean, obviously there were a few that got through.
Three left. The same-sex marriage, the trans bathroom, and I think the book ban are the 3 that I think are still sort of out there.
But so I mean, I'm actually happy. I'm not happy that those 3 passed, but I'm happy that so many of the other ones died. The Republican majority in the legislature. I mean, I shouldn't say the Republican majority. All of the lawmakers who voted against those bills deserve credit for that. Nolan, though, one of them was a bill, and by the way, it was endorsed by both Leader LaFleur and Leader Hogue. Would have required the inclusion of intelligent design in science curriculum. Nolan asks, just wondering your arguments for opposing teaching intelligent design alongside evolution in schools. Evolution, the explanation of the origin of the universe taught by the religion of atheism, teaches children that they are just highly evolved animals with no intrinsic value. How hateful it is to teach children that they don't matter. First of all, I take issue with Nolan's description of the way evolution is taught. It's not how it was taught to me in high school. It was not the way it's been taught to my children. So I don't agree that it's being taught. I also don't agree that atheism is a religion. It's specifically the opposite of a religion. But I don't want to argue theology with somebody. I'm just saying there's an appropriate place for theology and an appropriate place for science. Creationism is not science, and I don't want it in the science curriculum. Now, if we want to study it as a part of a social studies curriculum, as a part of a religious unit or something where the kids are studying world religions and the various beliefs, then that's great. Also, every parent in North Dakota has a right to send their kid to Bible camp or to Sunday school or to youth camp or whatever to learn about those things. But it doesn't belong in the science curriculum. And I don't want the legislature putting, these very politically themed curricular requirements on our schools.
Yeah, Rob, I agree. And Nolan, thanks for listening. And obviously, this is a topic where Nolan didn't agree with us on. So I'm still happy he's listening. I agree with you 100%. I mean, this is about our science curriculum needs to be science-based, not theology-based. And so I think, again, if we want to teach theology and teach all of theology, I'm fine with that. If you want it from a historical perspective, there's lots of different things you can do without pushing this into your science. I also agree with you. I mean, the way evolution is taught is not the way Nolan is describing it there. And,
By the way, if it is, I mean, Chad and I, you and I have very specific experiences in Bismarck and in Minot. If there are schools that are teaching it that way, I want to be clear, that's wrong. I don't want it taught that way, Nolan, if it is. It's just not my experience that it is.
And if you're experiencing that, you should go to your teacher, you should go to your principal, you should go to your superintendent, you should go to your school board.
Exactly. And there's a way to address that. I also am glad that Nolan's listening, even though it sounds like he probably disagrees with us pretty frequently. But Nolan, we're glad you're here. And I hope you send us more feedback because we certainly welcome it. Also, before we close out, I don't want to I don't want to forget this. We're actually, our live episode, we're going to be releasing the full, it's basically like a TV episode. Really awesome. I'm really
It is so awesome.
It is. I say that like normally we're pretty like taking shots at ourselves. Matt did this though. So Matt's awesome. Chad and I participated. But Matt made us look really, really good. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be released on our YouTube channel, plaintalknd.com. It'll be coming out Sunday evening, 7 p.m. The live show, we had Senate Majority Leader David Hogue, House Minority Leader Zach Hista, former state senators Jessica Bell, Aaron Oban. If you go to plaintalknd.com, it'll forward you to our YouTube channel. I hope you go there. I hope you subscribe. And by the way, we put up shorts for every episode, which are basically, think of it like highlight reels, like little highlights from each episode. So maybe if you need to get caught up or you want to share something that was said on the show, not only are the full episodes available on the YouTube channel, but those highlights are available as well. So that'll be a lot of fun. That's coming out Sunday, 7 p.m.
Sometimes, Rob, they're lowlights. They're lowlights that are shown.
Sometimes they're lowlights. That's not incorrect, but it's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys check that out. And as always, thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. I look at you and think that is exactly the sort of dweeb who's going to enjoy appropriations.
I would never call my senator a dweeb, just so you know that, Sean. I would never do that.